But I like when she tries to get away, it creates the situation that is just from fucking Superman 78, where the helicopter is falling and like Superman catches her and then catches the helicopter.
What? You mean not only does he look just like Christopher Reeve, he also reenact the same scene from Superman 78?
Uncomfortably so, yes.
Yes, yeah. That is definitely, anytime that happens in Secret Origins, I'm like, wow, it's from the movie.
It's
right.
from the movie.
I know what that is. Amazing. Ah, jeez. Come on, man.
Everyone, and welcome back to the Men of Steel podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jmike Folson.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, welcome back as we're going down a little bit of well, I was about to say history or like memory lane, but this is actually not a book that I've read before this pod.
Either.
But it felt very familiar because today we are looking at yet another Superman origin story. In this case, one that tried to take the Silver Age elements of the character and infuse them in a more modern time around the period of Infinite Crisis and all that. Because that's right, guys. Today we are talking about Superman's Secret Origins. And to have that conversation, we are joined by Alex McConnell.
Hello there, all you super fans out there.
Alex, I'm so glad to have you on the pod after our mutual friend Jala-chan introduced the two of us over on her Discord server.
Yeah, I was caught committing Superman rant in public, and as a result, that had the happy accident of me being invited to this lovely podcast, which I happened to be a listener for, so I was like, oh wow, okay, yeah.
Oh wait, already you were, or
yes,
after?
Yes, I had already been listening to you guys prior to this.
Oh, that's dope. That's so cool. I did not realize that.
I did not know that you guys were in that Discord at all, and I was kind of like, oh, I didn't know that I was doing Superman rants in front of these guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is after Jala had been on our show at that point. I mean, obviously it was after we had recorded, but I think it was after the episode that she was on talking about Hitman.
Oh, yes.
And what if no one had listened to that episode or don't know what I'm talking about, and I just said Hitman and we just moved on? No, the Hitman issue where like of the I Sing, where Superman confesses like his like feelings of failure after not saving one person in a giant accident where he saved everyone else. That issue that people really like from that run. Anyway, so we got to talking, and we were trying to figure out like what book to look at, and we've covered a lot of like the greatest hits on this show. And you brought up one that I honestly hadn't even read.
Oh, yeah.
And I find that fascinating because I on paper was like, yeah, I'm pro what Geoff Johns is doing over on the Superman book. He brought in Richard Donner. They like did all this stuff. Like he was trying to do some fun things. But for whatever reason, I kind of checked out. And I think I know why. I'm not trying to be mean. It's the Gary Frank art.
Yeah. It is.
What
an
do you mean,
acquired
Case?
taste. Yeah.
So, like, my take on the Gary Frank art is that Gary Frank is an artist that I really liked at the beginning of his career. I think he did some amazing stuff. His Incredible Hulk run looks so goddamn good. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed the Supergirl run that he did with Peter David, which also with Incredible Hulk. But anyway, like, I think that he has a really good foundation of like how to draw figures. He does, really good texture and so forth. But you know what? Come around like Supreme Power, and like you start to see him like leaning into some like worse trends in terms of like over detail on the characters, when I think he actually plays to the strongest when he's being a little bit more abstract. Mm-hmm. And then I also read some of his stuff when he was like doing the redesigns of the Squadron Supreme characters, where he like framed them at, like the classic looks as being like outdated and whatnot. And I like took a little bit of offense to that, where I'm like, no, these are classic Marvel characters. They go back to the 60s, like, and they are supposed to be spoofs of like DC characters. Like, it's like you're not having fun if you're like, riffing on their costumes and like how bad they are. Like that's not helpful. So by the time we get to like his run on Superman, like I think that he just generally like started infusing too much detail into his work, and it like to the point where like some of the looks just are kind of grotesque. Like when Lex Luthor smiles at one point, like I'm just like, in a way that's not good. Like it's not like like I just don't find it personally aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
And that is it. Like I'm not saying that he's a bad artist. I'm just saying that he's actually like putting too much work into some of the stuff, and it's the kind of too much work that like the colorists are clearly trying to keep up with, and like honestly needs to be like an Alex Ross like painted look for everything just to to bring it all together. But as it is, it kind of pushed me away. And also, I was a little wary of like bringing in too much Silver Age into the post-crisis Superman at the time. I grew up on the post-crisis Superman. Like I had gotten used to the idea of like, okay, we had the Pocket Universe Superboy,
right? But
he was never actually Superboy, and like like the Legion of Superheroes that we knew was the post-crisis, not even the post-crisis. It was the reboot era Legion of Superheroes, like the post-Zero Hour team,
right?
Is like the one that I knew.
Yeah.
So like. There were things about this book that you can understand why I was like trepidatious about it. Mm-hmm. And then it just kind of hit also at a time where I was kind of broke and like not buying books that I wasn't like automatically sold on.
Well, it's kind of Geoff Johns' move, isn't it? Like, I mean, depending on what run he's on, it's like he's on Flash, he brings back Barry Allen. He's on Green Lantern, he brings back Hal Jordan. Like his revert to the mean seems to be Silver Age, like
or Bronze Age, like and that is a Geoff Johns problem that I have with a bunch of his work. Like before we were recording, I was saying like Teen Titans is one that I like he reset Cyborg to the Bronze Age Cyborg without ever really acknowledging like the whole like he was like a fully techno-organic being for a while there.
Yeah.
Which, some people that's their status quo. But for me, I grew up like the generation past. So like Kyle Rayner was my Green Lantern. So resetting it to Hal felt, annoying. Wally West was my Flash. Like it was one where when we were synced up, like his JSA stuff, generally speaking, I was synced up with him completely. Like bringing on like the whole Redemption of Black Adam arc he did. I mean, alongside like what Gary Ordway did. That like it was like added to in JSA, and like having Captain Marvel actually join the JSA, I was like, this is perfect. This is what I've always wanted. He should be with them. Like that makes the most sense. So those are areas where I'm like, I really dig Geoff Johns, and I liked Up and Away, like the book that he launched with Kurt Busiek right after Infinite Crisis for Superman. Like I thought that was a really like fun book, and like the idea of bringing in Richard Donner is like interesting, but for whatever reason, this seemed like more of the type of Geoff Johns that I wasn't as much here for, and it's a bummer. And it's a bummer that in retrospect that I felt that way, because I actually ended up really liking this book, even though there are I know why I avoided it.
Yeah. Yeah,
and some of that is also growth for me as a Superman fan.
Sure.
Sorry, Alex, I cut you off there.
Oh no, that's okay. Yeah, no, I was just going to say there are like a few very specific things about this book that I think are like extremely brilliant ideas. Some of them have to do with Lex Luthor, and we'll get to that when we get there in the plot synopsis, I'm sure. But like some of how he presents Lex in this story, I find extremely fascinating and like weirdly prescient of certain historical figures that exist and are very prominent today. There's a lot of that though with Lex Luthor. I mean, like 80s Lex is pretty clearly Trump, down to his like the Lex Luthor origin book having that cover that is like the original Art of the Deal cover, but it has Luthor on it instead. So
well, and then Luthor Jr., his clone that he transferred his brain into with like Richard Branson, like big fucking head of hair, Australian for some goddamn reason.
Weirdly, when I was a kid, that was the era that I first jumped into Superman comics, and I was just like, what is going on? Like, Lex Luthor has this long red hair. He's like making out with Supergirl. What is happening? Like, I was so confused as a kid. What a weird place to come into comic books.
Yeah, what a weird status quo for Lex Luthor during arguably the biggest event for people hopping on to Superman books, which was the death and return of Superman.
Right. Yeah, true.
Where it's just like, yeah, no, don't worry about this whole, like, he's a clone, but he has the brain of the original, and he's now hooking up with the Supergirl, and it's not the Supergirl who you think it is.
Spoilers.
Yeah, I didn't even get to the point of realizing that it wasn't the Supergirl that I thought it was. I was just like, Lex Luthor's making out with Supergirl? What, is she bad? What I'm not...
Yeah.
Good times. We used to just dive right in, kids. Like, there was no, like, going back and figuring it out. You just, like, were like, all right, I guess I'll figure it out eventually, and kept reading comic books until it made sense or you got bored.
Yeah, in that regard, I kind of miss that aspect of comics because it made it like a puzzle where you'd be like, okay, so I know that by the middle of this year, roughly, this was the status quo, but what the hell was going on 2 months prior to that?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of comic runs where I'm just like, I can, like, with encyclopedic knowledge tell you what was going on, and then they're like, well, but why was it like that? And I'm like, I don't know, I didn't read that, like,
yeah,
that was before me. I can't tell you. You'd have to ask a different nerd.
No, speaking of that, I'm currently going through that process right now because I am reading the 5-year later timeline for Legion of Superhero stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm halfway through the second omnibus, which is they're fucking huge.
Yeah.
And I am finally digging into, like, the Legionnaires book, like the whole run of. I'm especially digging into the Legion of Superheroes when they're, like, Rebels era, which I never knew about, but explains so much, like, promotional artwork from, like, 0 Hour Time, where I'm like, who the fuck is that character? Oh, that's Ultra Boy? What? Like, amazing stuff in that regard. But for whatever reason, my dentist, when I was like in like junior high, had just a shitload of Valor and Legionnaire books. Like in his like waiting room for kids. And so I had read all these random ass issues of all the stuff that was pre-crisis Legionnaires, which is, for anyone not aware, Legionnaires, the pre-crisis Legionnaires, post-crisis pre-Zero Hour Legionnaires book was the spin-off book of Legion of Superheroes featuring what were called the SW6 Legion, which were teenage versions of the Legion of Superheroes, kind of sort of clones, also kind of sort of cut out from time, that were plucked from a point in history and then awakened in this like grim dystopic, like 5 years later world of the Legion of Superheroes. And then all of a sudden there's just these teenage versions of the Legion. And to distinguish them from the main team, they took on new code names with like new costumes. And these costumes became the base design for everything, like the post-crisis, the reboot era of Legion of Superheroes, which was goddamn confusing for someone who like was reading books like from both periods. And they had all new code names, except for where they didn't, because a few of them just didn't for some reason. Some of them made sense. Like Pharaoh didn't need to have a new code name because, he was dead.
I was going to say, he's dead, right?
Right, exactly. But that was one of the key details there. But for a minute there, they had 2 Valors, which was Mon-El for the record, and 2 Laurel Gens, which was basically Supergirl, a teenage and an adult version, like just running around in the Legion universe, which is wild to think about from a power scale. Yeah. Oh, and 2 Ultra Boys.
Man, it's almost as confusing as X-Men.
Yeah. Well, so I'm finally getting to some of those issues, and I'm like, oh, that's what the hell was going on in that issue. Like, there were legit issues that I was like never clear if it was pre-crisis or pre-Zero Hour or post-Zero Hour, and now it's like, oh, okay, now I see what's going on. Like, because like I knew the issue really well, but I had none of the context.
Yeah. It is always gratifying when you finally cross that threshold to like the edge of stuff that you remember from before, and you're like, oh, this is how it all connects. That's amazing.
Yeah, you feel like you can see the Matrix for a moment there.
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes it's a little disappointing because you had built it up in your head, especially like if you've always seen the penultimate episode of a show and then you finally see the finale, and 9 times out of 10, it's not going to live up to your memory or to like what you had imagined in your head. That said, there is value in sort of speculating on like, well, what were like this thing that I had never actually seen really like. This is me trying to pivot back to Superman's origin.
Sure.
Because by the early 2000s, we had tried to deal with like the post-crisis Superman for a while.
Yeah.
The John Byrne reboot of the character had been, successful enough. It had been solidified with Superman for all seasons. Yeah. Which is very clearly built in the shadow of the Man of Steel in a way that reinforces it really well. And then we had Superman Birthright, the Mark Waid relaunch, which I'm not actually a big fan of, but I think it's for the same reason that I was trepidatious about this book, which is that I lived in the post-crisis era as my Superman fandom, genesis. I was worried that like trying to bring back Silver Age elements were going to disrupt the character that I had really come to care for, even though like I'm a huge fan of the Alan Moore Supreme, like the Silver Age Superman stuff I'm here for, but like I felt like there was a place for this new Superman to like really grow into that space as opposed to backfilling him with all the weirdness. I really like that post-crisis Superman very quickly got the weird shit back. He got his Fortress of Solitude back. He got, he had multiple encounters with like Kryptonian intelligences. He had the pocket universe. Like he had a Supergirl, he had a clone and he had a guy dressed up in an armor just like him,
Yeah. I mean, that's always the joy of of resetting on a crisis is that you get to see like things that you're familiar with, but through a mirror darkly, perhaps. It's always a little different, but it hits all those familiar notes and then does a new twist with it, which we definitely got in the post-crisis era more or less successfully as crises went on, and we all went, another crisis? Oh, it's still crisis, I guess. Here we go. That's a matter for another time, perhaps.
A crisis in time, if you will, a 0 hour.
Dun, dun.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I was just gonna add, like, as far as the Silver Age stuff goes, like, there's basically only one writer who's worked on Superman that I trust to inject Silver Age stuff into Superman, and that's Grant Morrison. Other than that, like, please no. But that's just me, I guess.
I could see Alan Moore doing it, although when I say that, I mean, like, I could see Alan Moore doing a good job. I couldn't actually see Alan Moore coming on to work on Superman anytime ever in the future.
Actually agreeing to do it, sure, yeah, that'd be a weird comic book miracle.
Yeah, I said the phrase, I could see him do it, and I was like, I mean that in a very specific way because I actually can't see him do it.
Yeah.
So this book, now coming from a perspective of a few years later and more open to the Silver Age in general, like I've always been a fan of the Silver Age, but like really embracing just like how much history and how disruptive trying to take that away from Superman was to the fandom that existed.
That's true.
I am here for this one in a way that I am not here for Barry Allen coming back, or I can live with Hal Jordan coming back, but like Barry coming back was like just throwing away a perfectly great like send off of the character, and you had a vehicle to have him pop in every now and then if you needed him, but for the most part you didn't have to, because you could just say like, yeah, he's in the fucking future, and like, and he can come back a couple of times, but we know that he dies like fairly shortly after this point in his life. So let him have his like nice time with Iris, have the Tornado Twins, have Impulse and Excess's grandkids, and then go die nobly in the Crisis. Like, that was perfect. They didn't need to bring him back in any goddamn way. And now, because of the show and everything, everyone's just like, oh, well, the Flash is Barry. And I'm like, no, but the Flash had a legacy and a meaning to it. Like, sorry. I am so sorry. I am such a child of the 90s.
No, man, I get it. I'm there with you. Like, Wally was definitely my Flash, so like I understand that feeling. Even knowing that there are actually quite a lot of Barry Allen reboot comics that I think are super cool and have really neat plots, I'm still like, but Wally is the Flash, though.
Right.
Yep.
So anyway, I think that this one is threading the needle better than those. Like, I think that fair. The Superboy stuff, like, does a great job. It does exactly what I say it should, which is that like he should have operated as Superboy, but generally speaking, no one saw it because he's just out there like saving lives and moving faster than a speeding bullet and like doesn't get observed. And there's just like rumors of like, did a Superboy like catch the car from like falling off a cliff? Like, I think that's perfect. I think that's exactly what you want because I actually really like the Superboy tie into the Legion of Superheroes. So I really like Clark doing that. In fact, I would be fine if Clark never was Superboy in the current time, if as long as he goes to the future to be part of the Legion in that point. I did think it was awkward when this was coming out because it was right after the reboot era of Legion of Superheroes like kind of ended, and I was a fan of that era too because I like the Legion in general, and I was a little worried about like, oh, are we introducing like yet another Legion, but now it's like a very Silver Age Legion? Like what's going on here, guys? And that became the retro boot Legion for anyone who's curious about the Legion.
And the answer is yes.
And that just like keeps adding to the Legion being more and more complex when it never needed to be this like complicated. It could have just been it's Superman's friends from the future.
It's and yet for some reason Legion, much like X-Men is in Marvel, is a place where continuity goes to die. It is so snarled. Although I will say that Legion book, which is in a weird way kind of a sequel to this Secret Origin in that it's the same writer and artist, and it feels like a continuation of the Legion segment in this book, is actually pretty fun. Like I do enjoy that book. I've read it back to back with Secret Origin when I read this the first time, and it felt like a very good, like, strong follow off of that, and I had a lot of fun with it. That was good times. I think that's
I gotta check it out. Like, I am a fan of the Legion of Superheroes. There's just I have strong opinions about them as well, and so that is. But at the same time,
only a fan. Case?
No, I would say only a fan. Like, look, we know people who are like hardcore fans and have way better like encyclopedic knowledge about the Legion of Superheroes than I do. Like,
Impossible.
No, because I humbly back down on that one. but I am a fan. Like, I certainly am a fan of the series and of the concept as a whole. We're basically just talking about issue 2 right now, by the way.
We kind of skipped one entirely, didn't we?
We'll go back to issue 1, but we might as well just finish up talking about issue 2. So issue 2 is them introducing the Legion of Superhero stuff, which is very fun. It also confirms that Superboy is a functioning character, using the costume to sort of, make it look crazier when he gets identified. Much the same as in Secret Identity, where it is literally leading into like, what, you're going to say that Superman saved you? In this case, it's just like, you're going to say a kid in a cape saved you? Like, that sounds crazy.
Yeah.
I guess. I was thinking about this today, where it's just like, this is still in a world where like the Golden Age superheroes existed. Like Green Lantern, like Alan Scott existed. Like, people know who he was. Like,
yeah, because like later on in the book, Lois's dad mentions it too, and I was like, so they know about superheroes or they don't know about superheroes?
I mean, I get that it's been like a long time, and I think, again, this is just a hard thing that you have to deal with when you try to have like the history of the comics match up to the continuity of the comics as best you can. And that's going to be a challenge. But it was a consideration I had here. However, so going through some of the beats here, we are introduced to Clark being Superboy actively as a hero by him saving Lionel Luthor, to try to tie in the two characters. So they are doing their best to have businessman Lex and also Lex Luthor, the child of Smallville, who is embittered by Superboy. I don't think they pull it off because there isn't anything about Superboy that actually sends Luthor into this like whole spiral of being a supervillain, which is the one, which at that point you're like, so why do they even know each other if they're not going to like fork in some sort of meaningful way? And I mean, like, you could argue that it's fine to exist so that like other writers could backfill it if they wanted to in additional series about the whole thing. But it's kind of implied that like Luthor isn't really around for very long and doesn't really know Clark particularly well, which is unfortunate because I think that like a real examination of that could be very cool.
Yeah, I mean, like, in this comic, at least, it seems like for the first 3 times that Clark meets Lex again, he goes, "Oh, hey, it's you again." And Lex is like, "Who are you? Am I supposed to know you?" And so it's like, yeah, like, all the stuff that happens in Smallville kind of seems like it didn't matter to Lex at all. At least that's how he's fronting about it. I'm sure you could, like you say, go in and backfill and be like, "Oh, he was just being bitter and pretending that he didn't remember, but it actually mattered to him a lot," or whatever. I mean, the idea of what is, I mean, it's pretty clear. I don't know if they actually say it on the page or not, but it's pretty strongly implied that Lex was trying to get his dad killed, and Clark saved him, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
So it's like, from the very beginning, Clark is foiling Lex's heinous plans, even when they don't know who one another are yet, which is kind of fun. I do. Yeah, like, I just felt
like he's already like on the path to villainy, and I kind of like the idea of Lex having like a gleaming moment where there was hope for him to be a hero, or at least like not a bad guy.
Yeah. He is. He does seem like he's born bad in this version of the story. So
yeah, and I mean, like, there's a bleeding heart story for why, like, he has a drunk father who abuses him. Like, I get it. Like, it's legit. Like, but it's like nice to have the idea that like Lex could have been a good guy, but things go wrong with his relationship with Superboy.
Yeah,
in a regard that like I think Smallville had like a good space to explore. For however effective it was, like. Yeah. It's a cool idea of like decompressing that relationship between the two. And here it's very compressed.
Lots of things are very compressed in this comic book. This is something I was like, as I was rereading it again, I was like, for the first like 3 or 4 issues, I was like, is it me, or do each of these issues feel like the first issue of a run rather than being like, it's like sequential number ones over and over again, and instead of feeling like they build on one another. That's not something I remembered from when I read this originally. But it's like the first one is like, here's Superman's origin, here's the Legion's origin, here's the and I'm like, okay, but they don't. It doesn't perfectly cohere in the way that I want it to. And as a result, I feel like I'm reading like multiple number ones instead of 1, 2, and 3, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like a collection of like snapshots.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. I do like that they introduce like Clark having like the secret tunnel back into his parents' house. It doesn't matter if it's like downtown Smallville or at the farm. Like, it's easy enough to put that in there and have it just be a thing that people remember, and that's fun. I like the running joke about like Clark being very embarrassed about his outfit. Like, that even continues into him being an adult.
Yeah. It was interesting with the crystals and his glasses, and I was like, I wasn't sure if that was canon or if they made it up for this book, where his mom like sliced the crystals in half and gave him Coke bottle glasses. And I was like, haha, that's hilarious. But
there have been such weird versions of the Superman mythos for his glasses. Like, I don't even know what's real versus what's been like parody at this point. Like, did he actually have like mesmerizing glasses? I think he did officially at one point. So I don't know for sure.
I mean, it wasn't a bad thing by any means, but like, it was just like a funny little aside where like he's like, why do I have to wear these glasses? And they're like, well, keep you from burning down buildings. And he's like, oh, and he's like, you never did mention how it happened the first time. And he's like, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, we can roll on our conversation about issue 2 and issue 1 in that regard. So the Lana Lang kissing him and his heat vision kicking in, it's funny enough. Like, they do a good job of having Lana Lang be his like true partner, which is kind of interesting. Like, that's a post-crisis thing that they're rolling in there. Mm-hmm. And so it's like fun to like make that like, okay, this is the canon bit. It like allows for like Man for All Seasons to still be an applicable story for the character. It does seem like low-hanging fruit to be like, every time she kisses him, his heat vision kicks in, is I guess what I'm getting at.
Oh, that, and they kind of like drop her at the end of the book 1, and she's never brought up again.
Issue 2. At the beginning of issue
like,
2.
Yeah,
that's where he's like, I like you as a friend, which I find interesting. Generally, there's a part of me being like, Clark, no, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you're going to make that whole thing work. Like, do you deal with like a bad breakup? Do you deal with like how whatever?
I don't like he was trying to break up with her. He was more of like the whole like him being from Krypton kind of like changed everything.
Yeah.
And so he was like, I don't know if this can work out because I'm an alien, and I have to save people now, I guess. So I can't really be your boyfriend.
Well, and he's like afraid of touching people because he might hurt them. Like, Pete Rossi like really fucked up in the first issue.
He was fine.
Yes, ultimately, but it wasn't for like that much trying. Like,
but Clark felt bad about it because Clark is a good boy.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
he's the goodest boy.
He is the goodest boy.
So it is a scenario of like not wanting to hurt her. I get that. It is interesting because like by the time we get to like Lois, like very clearly there's that chemistry between them. So I don't know. I guess that's the part there where just like, no, but when you're a teenager, like just have this relationship now. Cause like, because you're dumb.
Yeah.
What else are you doing?
Yeah. But as an extremely awkward teen myself who definitely fell flat on his face in several relationships that should have been a slam dunk. I understand what happened with him. I get it.
I do too. That's why I'm like mad because I'm like, no, because I'm seeing myself in him. Like all those times where it's just like the whole like, oh, that was flirting, wasn't it? Fuck.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, it's just like all the normal teen problems, and then heap on top of that a healthy heaping of Kryptonian, just like a great big giant rocket ship carried on his back at all times that no one else can see.
Yeah, so that's roughly when the Legion actually shows up. I think this is classic enough without them doing the whole like hi Clark to Superboy and then like hi Superboy to Clark Kent and like say hi to your foster parents like the Kents, like that whole bit from like the first appearance of the Legion of Superheroes. He doesn't do that. He just like has them show up and it's like, okay, that's kind of cool. And I like the idea that they're flying and he's like, wait, like I can have friends who fly like me. I found that as like a really nice line at the end of the issue. Like, like the notion that he's got friends who feel like him, even if they're inspired by him. I think that's a really core part about the relationship between Clark and the Legion. And I think that this issue does a really good job of like setting that up. I also enjoy that Superboy is the one who creates the "Long Live the Legion" slogan.
That's pretty fun.
That's a fun catchphrase. And
they were all kind of throwing around catchphrases. What's your problem?
It's
Lightning Lad was trying very hard.
Yeah,
they're trying so hard.
It is very funny that he basically makes up the iconic battle cry of the entire Legion just basically to try and look cool.
It is always fascinating having Superboy meet Brainiac 5 in a scenario where he doesn't know who Brainiac 1 is.
Oh yeah, that's actually kind of great. I think that's quite good. I mean, it is also fun for a more mature Superman to encounter Brainiac 5 and be like, huh, interesting, I'll have to think about this. But like, but also to have it go the other way is interesting too, I think. Particularly because it's like, if this version of Superman meets Brainiac 1 now, like, will his immediate thought be, oh, you must be cool? That kind of thing.
Obviously, he has the more adventures with the Legion at this point, so they would tell him like, no, Brainiac 5 is making up for the crimes of his original ancestor, who was your foe.
So watch out for that when it comes around.
So when you meet a guy named Brainiac, he's not cool. We have to swear about that part.
Yeah,
I do kind of enjoy the fact that like the science police are kind of like chasing them around already.
Yeah, so this section is the spot that is the most leading into all of the stuff that Johns was putting out there at the time, like the Earth supremacist or human supremacists that are in there is a big plot point for his Retroboot Legion book that runs around this time.
Yeah,
they have all these things where it's just like, the resurrection of Doomsday, Kandor, General Zod, and the Earth New Krypton War. Like, all of that stuff is stories that are in the Geoff Johns run of that era. It's classic kind of baiting for those things. And I'm a little bummed that he didn't like drop some like more classic stories in there in addition to the ones that he was putting out there. It's all of the stories that he's working on, but I get the impulse, and like it's fine. Like, this is a side book that needs the clout of like teasing stuff that's going to be important for the main book at this point.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fun thing that writers get to play with when time travel is involved, right? It's a very classic move in the Doctor Who fandom as well, to foreshadow your big story arcs you have planned for later in very early episodes. So he's pulling that trick.
Yeah, just no one's ever gonna do it as well as Dan Slott, because he teased like 15 years ago in She-Hulk the in story for his Fantastic Four run, which would happen be 15 years later.
Yeah,
like
amazing.
That took some work.
Yeah, but if he'd never got there, it would have just been a throwaway line that everyone forgot, right? You know?
Basically. Anywho, so Clark comes back. He tells his parents about the whole thing, and then he goes and catches Crypto, which...
Yes.
I gotta admit, when I first saw the ship, I was like, they're not gonna introduce Kara already, are they? Because he was like, I'm so lonely.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. I don't have anyone to call my friend except for the people from the future. But I don't know when they come back. And the spaceship arrives. And I was like, they wouldn't, really?
Well, and they set it up because earlier when you see Smallville, there is a Crypto statue that they fly over, or
right.
inflatable balloon. I'm not sure which.
You see the little ARF.
Yep. And then we finally get the actual death of Lionel Luthor, and that concludes his like youth period. So cycling back to issue 1 for anything that we didn't talk about. I don't know. I think that Johns does a really good job of sort of exploring the psyche of a person who is growing up, crushing everything around him by accident and needing to hold back. I think he does a really good job there. There's some really cool moments. I will say this. He does a great job with the Lana Clark relationship in this, which is why I'm like kind of bummed that it just like, oh, I think of you as a friend, because it seems to be, it's very well written and there's great chemistry is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Yeah. I do like the dynamic between Clark and Lana in this book. It doesn't, like I kind of talked about before, it kind of doesn't connect to what comes later. Like once we get past the Smallville segment, which is where the real strong, like repeated number ones energy happens, like a lot of what follows in this book, like flows from then on, but it feels like a separate story almost.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do like it. I've always been a real strong fan of exploring like the emotional vulnerability of Clark in his nascent period when his powers are first manifesting, and like how acquiring these incredible abilities would probably negatively affect a sensitive young boy like Clark. I've always thought that if I got the opportunity to write my own Superman origin story, that the first power I would have come online for him is actually super hearing. Because I think the idea of being able to hear terrible things going on and not be able to do anything about it would be the sort of thing that would really affect Clark in a strong way and kind of speak to why he's so ardent about doing the right thing all the time, even when it costs him, you know?
Yeah, I really like that.
I can't believe I'm going to admit this on air. But I have to give credit to Man of Steel and the Snyder when they did it on screen. when
his powers kick in, yeah.
When his hearing and his X-ray vision kick in, because that's like the best way to visualize that, of him like sitting in like school being a normal kid, and then freaky stuff just starts happening, and he starts having a panic attack because he doesn't know what the hell is happening to him.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's the only good thing I'm going to say about that movie.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up Man of Steel, because this issue in particular feels very informative of that, which makes sense because Goyer is involved with both. So
true.
Or rather, Goyer is the friend of Geoff Johns. Is the bigger point.
He wrote the introduction.
That's why I was thinking about Goyer being involved in this book. But he has co-written stuff with Johns in the past, so it makes sense that he would be on the looking out for what Johns was working on at any given time, doing Superman origin stuff. Like the "You Are My Son's" shot is really good here, and it's verbatim taken into the movie.
Yeah, it's a good another point is we actually have a good dad here. Oh my gosh, he's looking out for Clark and making sure that he's taken care of.
And a good mom. I really like the idea of Martha seeing what Kryptonians dress like and basing the costume on that. I think that's really nice. Where she's like, we want to support your culture and your upbringing. We want to support who you are, all of you.
Yeah, that's very cute. I really like that, and I'm very pro the Kents being extremely good people, because it's it's in my view is it is the only rational explanation for why Clark Kent / Superman would come out the way he is if he was raised by good people. His nature does not necessarily lend him towards being a saint, so clearly nurture has to be the deciding factor there.
Yeah.
Anytime the Kents are portrayed as kind of scuffed, I get a little bristly about that.
Yeah, this book definitely leans into the Kents are the best people, which is a take that I am always here for with Superman upbringing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do enjoy that after the Smallville stuff, they don't come down on if the Kents are still alive or not.
Mm-hmm.
They're we're just gonna move on. Whichever you prefer, guys.
Well, they have that one shot when
the flashback where it's where he's hugging him and saying I'm proud of you, as you go off into the bigger world or whatever.
Well, that one, and after he shows up as Superman, they're on the front porch.
Yeah, that's
he's is that the same one?
Yeah, that's the shot.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
It's when he's talking to Jimmy. But
I thought there was one after that one where he's Superman, and once the cat's out the bag, he can't really put it back in or something like that.
Right, they're talking about him going off to be Superman. But what I'm saying is that they could have still died right after that.
Yeah, it could have been a flashback.
It's a Canon.
No, what I'm saying is it's allowing for both to be the scenario, and I think they settled on the Kents being alive. But
I want both of them to be alive. Okay, it makes more fun for the story.
Yeah. So let's jump into the post time jump scenario, issue 3, which is another one of these we're starting off with Superman issue 1.
Yep.
I like Metropolis being kind of a shittier place when Clark first arrives.
Yeah.
That's a fun detail. Everyone being only tourists look up.
Yeah. A very selfish culture around Metropolis at the beginning here, which is, a fun, a fun statement on how the presence of Superman could affect the culture of a place also in an interesting way.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things about this book, and one of the reasons why I come out of it so positive at the end. The fact that Metropolis, we see it shift over the course of his time as Superman. That's great. I think that's so cool. Klutzy Clark is one that I have a hard time with. You need to do really good work with that to make it something that I'm here for, because otherwise it feels like a shtick that he's leaning into too much.
Yeah.
What do you mean, Case?
And it's a razor edge that you have to walk, because I don't want him to be so fucking cool, but at the same time, I think the fact is he's a 6'4", beefcake from Kansas. You're gonna respect him to a certain degree, and this book does a great job of being oh, you want everyone to underestimate you. I think that's a really cool take on the relationship with Lois. But right off the bat, he has his briefcase pop open multiple times, and I feel every time Clark is a klutz, it should be he knows what he's doing and it's on purpose.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like that in these introductions to the character, and that's where it's just okay, rein it in. And I get that part of it allows for him to bump into Rudy Jones so that we can, well, I guess it's a Superman origin story, so we're going to talk about the Parasite and Metallo in this book, because it seems that those are the characters that they want to introduce early on every time with Superman. And we spend some time with Rudy Jones as a human in this book. And goddamn is he insufferable.
Yeah, he's the worst,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah, he's not a good person. It is a very interesting take to have him be metaphorically parasitic as well as physically.
Yeah. I thought that was clever.
Yeah, it's really good.
I just didn't like him.
No,
Oh, you're not supposed to.
I know, but I got so mad, especially like by the end when they're like, if you could just do the eye test. It's like, I'm not big on tests. Like, do you have more donuts? Like that was like pushing it a bit too far at that point.
Yeah, there's definitely characters you love to hate. Rudy Jones is a character that you hate to hate. He is just like he's terrible, and every time he's on screen, I'm like, can we get rid of this guy?
Right. But like I said, it was clever. It
worked. It worked.
It's just a little heavy-handed in a way that like kind of bothered me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the Planet Office. I like. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a flashback, so with Lombard being like super in shape and whatnot, all fine there. I find it interesting when Ron Troop is there when Clark arrives, because like when he's originally introduced, he's like trying to fill in for Clark Kent at the Daily Planet, like he looks up to Clark Kent. So that's an interesting shift there. I do really like the introduction of Jimmy.
Yeah.
And like the friendship between Jimmy and Clark is really nice. Like him calling him Jim, him being the only one to remember his name is a nice detail.
Yep.
Yeah. That's always a thing I like with various versions of Clark and various continuities, is when they give him a beat where he remembers a person's name when he doesn't have to, because it's so frequent that people don't do that, and it's a very easy way to illustrate how much he cares about other people.
Yeah, like I love in most continuities where he knows like all of like the hot dog vendors and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly.
That he goes to.
Yeah.
Or like even in the New 52 timeline when Clark quote unquote dies and like all the planet people are having a eulogy for him, and one bit of it that I always remember is Lois saying that Clark didn't just always give money to all of the homeless people on the street, but he knew all their names.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, I like the introduction of Lois here as this like firebrand reporter, like always here for like a feisty Lois.
Yeah.
And I like when she's introduced to Clark, it's like the Lois is fine. Like there's a little bit of like a flirtation going on there. Mm-hmm. Because again, like that makes sense. Like Clark towers over everyone in the room.
Can't
I do find it like, I like the angle of the Daily Planet being like nearly broke at this point. Because I've never seen it done that way before, and I was like, okay, this is kind of different.
I really enjoy the reason why they're nearly broke also because they will not go along with Luthor's BS. Like, they will not buy into the fake news of Lex Luthor, and as a result, they're almost bankrupt.
Yeah, if you imagine that Luthor owns 78% of Metropolis, and so like his advertising dollars must dictate almost everything going on in the news.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's great. I like that Lois grabs Clark to use as like a part of her plan immediately and rushes off
right
of him.
away.
The Rudy Jones cameo when they're leaving is fine. It gets more annoying later, but in this point he's like grifting a 20 off of Clark is like, all right. I'm cool with him being a parasite here, and we get the whole like he'll suck you dry bit right there.
Yeah.
Foreshadowing.
I have to admit, I get very excited when she's like, move over, like Woodward and Bernstein, and make way for Lois and Clark.
Nice.
Like that's exciting, and like using Clark as like a distraction to like sneak in. Nice. That's perfect. Oh, and here's Metallo. Because of course it's Metallo. I enjoy the hint that the metal is like particularly strong once like charged with like a type of radiation. When you're like, oh yeah, okay, so that's going to be the kryptonite ultimately. It is weird that Lex already has the kryptonite at this point, so like why hasn't he already like tested it? Like
I feel like he has been. It's kind of implied that he's been testing it, and then they kind of like don't go anywhere with it except for the whole parasite introduction as a villain introduction. I do also find it funny that Lois thinks she's sneaking, but the security officers notice her right away.
Yeah, like they know, and she's on first name basis with them. Like,
yeah,
she says, "Louis, long time."
It's not the first time she's been thrown out of a Lex
Luthor event. Yeah. But I like when she tries to get away. It creates the situation that is just from fucking Superman 78, where the helicopter is falling and like Superman catches her and then catches the helicopter.
What? You mean not only does he look just like Christopher Reeve, they also reenact the same scene from Superman 78?
Uncomfortably so, yes.
Yes, yeah. That is definitely, anytime that happens in Secret Origins, I'm like, wow, it's from the movie.
It's right. From the movie.
I know what that is. Amazing. Ah, jeez. Come on, man.
But it is cool to get like a look up in the sky right as he like rushes by. Like those do feel like good moments right there. Like Superman is written very earnestly in this book. That is a thing that makes me respect it more so than necessarily like it's punching above its weight class.
Sure. Yeah. I definitely don't want a cynical Superman, so I'm down for that. But like, leaning into the Superman the movie stuff very strongly.
It's like there's so many other ways you can go for a Superman. He doesn't always have to look like Christopher Reeve, is my thing.
Yeah.
There have been like how many other Supermen since him? Like 3 or 4?
Since Reeve? Let's see.
Yeah.
Dean Cain, Tyler Hoechlin, Henry Cavill, Brandon Routh, and Tom Welling. So 5 right there.
5. So there's plenty of other
not even
faces
counting the new movie coming out.
Yeah. So I'm just saying there's other faces that you can use.
There are many Supermen.
So next up we get this whole like Lex Luthor showering the citizens of Metropolis by like selecting one person to like fulfill his entire thing, which by the way is exactly the plot of the Disney movie Wish that just came out.
Oh really?
That's funny. No, I really like that. This is one of the things that I recommended this book for, though, is I really like how Lex treats Metropolis prior to Superman's appearance on the scene. The fact that he portrays what he's doing as like a beneficent thing for these lowly people is so Lex Luthor, and also like the fact that everyone kind of goes along with it. It has this weird like dark Willy Wonka energy to it that like I find it so fascinating. It's such a like a warped mentality that like when I talk to my friends about this book, I'm always like, it honestly feels like how the 1% view their philanthropy just like solidified into like a single like page of comic. That this idea that they're doing this great thing by picking out this one person from amongst the unwashed masses and giving them their hopes and dreams or whatever, and look how good I am for doing this It makes me hate Lex a whole lot, which is the point.
Well, and somehow he's like even worse to Rudy Jones. Like when it's like at a glance, I could have you get a higher education. Or just like, I'm just gonna guess you don't have a college degree, just based on like
vibes.
Yeah.
And it's like some of these people that get picked out of the crowd also just kind of get experimented on, like Rudy Jones.
Yeah.
Screw Lex Luthor and all of his holier-than-thou BS is basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. But meanwhile, Rudy, like, this is where it becomes like a bit over the top, where he's just like, can I get more donuts? Like, are these all free?
God.
Yeah. Are these free is the first thing he asks. And then he tries to like argue like, well, if you would send me to college, could I just get the money that you would have spent on me going to college?
Yeah, man. He's just a grasping little worm of a man. And it only becomes more literal as the comic goes on.
Yeah. So then we get Lex like pulling aside Lois and Clark to like talk to them. And this is the spot where he drops General Lane as a character in here, which is a thing that I am generally pleased with, like the increase of importance that Sam Lane has had since the 80s. Like, it's so wild that the first time he was referenced as being a general was the Man of Steel series. And so the fact that this has become so integral that he's the main villain of the first season of My Adventures with Superman is awesome. I find that so cool.
Yeah, and that was at that moment when all of these characters were involved. I was like, oh man, weird. Real shades of My Adventures with Superman going on in this book. Feels like a rough draft run of it almost in a weird way.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that can just be taken to like what the zeitgeist canon of Superman is like. Not the canon of a specific era of Superman, but like just what we expect out of Superman has become, very. There are tropes that we just sort of like assign as being like, this makes sense. Like part of his early adventures are he deals with Parasite and Metallo. Like that's just going to be a regular part of it. Lex Luthor gets introduced and like builds up to being his greatest villain ever. Like that's just going to be a thing that's going to be part of this world. How he finds the rocket, how he interacts with his Kryptonian upbringing, like what he does with his powers as a kid versus whatever. Like there's wiggle room in all of that, but like we are very much like assigning like this is the way that the animated series did, that Morrison did, that My Adventures with Superman did, that this book is doing. Like
there's a checklist with their own vibes, for sure.
But it is like this repeating pattern.
Yeah, I was actually, this is kind of a tangent, but like I was actually surprised at the deep cuts that were present in My Adventures with Superman. Like Metagang getting a shout out in the first season. I was like, okay, all right, somebody's read some comic books. Okay. I was like, it was very interesting to me that they had Livewire be one of the first villains in that one to crop up, like even ahead of Parasite and Metallo.
Yeah, that's like them trying to like mix it up a bit.
Yeah. Because when that character first showed up, I was speculating on like a much older, more established supervillainesses present, and then it was Livewire, and I was like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and she's on a shock jock this time too, so this is completely new territory for them.
Yeah. They went a different way with it.
Back in the comic, we get the introduction of the Parasite. Actually, so they're like, Rudy, can you read this line? And he's like, I'm not good at tests. Actually, could you just feed me? And he gets a donut that gets like radioactive goo on it and takes one bite, and that's enough to turn him completely into the Parasite.
I've seen weirder villain origins, I guess, but yeah, it is. I ate a radioactive donut is definitely not the thing you want to tell your cellmate when you end up in whatever supercell after being defeated by Superman for the 15th time.
Yeah. But I'll say this, it's a good looking Parasite. Like,
yeah, that's true.
It's appropriately like kind of grotesque. And this is an area where that level of detail that Gary Frank is putting into his art, I think it actually works out really well. Like his mouth is really creepy looking. I don't necessarily want to fat shame a character, but like he's got this sort of like gross kind of physicality to him that he inherits from Rudy Jones, as opposed to looking just sort of like a guy in a purple suit.
Yeah, that's true.
That he sometimes looks like. I like the whole like, you smell good. Or like, I can smell you, smells good. And then he like bites into Superman and actually like sucks into him, which is all very effective stuff. That tongue like licking up the blood. Oh, this was an insight I had. Is his skin like all tongue?
I don't know.
Because I was thinking about that like in terms of like how he can kind of taste things and like absorb nutrients through like physical contact with stuff, not just like through his mouth, but like just like making like touching a thing, and he kind of like can sense energy. And I was like, oh, that's a really creepy like perspective on it, where like his entire flesh is just the tongue.
Just a giant tongue. I never thought of it out like that, but that is interesting.
A little creepy.
Like that kind of explains why he's pink.
Right, yeah, totally.
I don't know. The fight itself is like pretty easy. Like Superman like hits him with the heat beam and then like freezes him and is able to take him down. It's not significant. It's just like a quick encounter for the sake of having one. And then Lex confronts Superman and is like, I'm going to sue you.
Yeah, he does a good job of doing the thing that Lex often does, which is try to turn the crowd on Superman really fast by asking questions about where he came from and what he actually wants, and like appeals to everyone's greater cynicism, basically. And it actually causes Superman to flee in the moment because he's not sure what he should be doing or saying yet. He's still too green at it, you know?
Yeah. And I like that. I like that his super hearing has been this like big source of anxiety for the character.
Mm-hmm.
And it causes him to fly to the Daily Planet, where he has a really good scene with Jimmy Olsen. I really like how they like bond over both like kind of feeling like outcasts in the city.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. Like him agreeing to take his like one shot or like the one photo for Jimmy is really fun. And like that sets up like, oh yeah, I'm doing a favor for my pal who I want to be friends with both as Superman and as Clark.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps him like stay in and like proves himself as a photographer. It's a nice scene. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny that, I don't know if it's intentional, but it feels like it's almost, the beginning of it is almost like a parody of that famous talking down the person planning on jumping from All-Star.
Yeah.
Where he says to Jim, like, don't jump. And Jim's like, jump? What are you talking about? Are you crazy?
Right.
And then they just have a normal conversation about something else. Yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. I was like, I wonder if that is a joking nod towards that All-Star scene.
It might be. I mean, it would certainly match up with the timeline.
Yeah.
And then Jimmy brings in this like great photo of Superman doing the Superman pose. And it looks so good. And Lois immediately is like, look like you've got a new dream team. And I love feisty Lois. Like, it's so good. Then we get Superman saving a bunch of shit after like newspapers actually start like being like, maybe Superman's a pretty good thing. And Luthor is pissed about this.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's going after the Daily Planet. So we get like shots of Superman like saving stuff, like a bunch of really good ones. And then we get Superman holding a car over his head, which has to be an Action Comics #1 reference that
Right.
Jimmy is allowed to get a photo of.
I thought that too. And I was like, are they trying to pull it off, or is it going for something else? And I was like, oh, this is actually pretty cool. I love this.
It is, in my opinion, kind of essential, especially in Origin, to have bits of Superman saving people rather than just fighting villains. I'm looking at you, Man of Steel. So, like, you know, that's it's nice that it's here. It feels it's compact, but it feels fun. I do think it's kind of funny, actually, that a lot of the Daily Planet photos of Superman are actually kind of staged. That's kind of a funny twist on it, that he's like after. I mean, he's so fast and everything. It's like getting shots of him in the moment would be like nearly impossible. So it is kind of a funny idea that after he's done actually saving people, he just like stages fake rescue photos for Jimmy. That's an amusing idea.
It's like Spider-Man.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'd always had this idea that on a sort of like philosophical level, that it would be kind of interesting in early Superman stories to have Lois Lane be the primary antagonist of Lex Luthor, and for the enmity between Luthor and Superman to basically build because Superman keeps stopping Luthor from killing Lois Lane. This comic kind of does that in the sense that, like, I feel like for a lot of it, Luthor's real beef is with the Daily Planet more than Superman. It's kind of more diffuse than how I would do it, but like I do find that idea fun, that like the journalists in the story who kind of represent truth are the like polar opposite to Lex Luthor's lies and corruption.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect point, because then the next scene we have after Superman's done all these things that's getting like media attention, he's mad at the planet and he's like, Sam Lane, you need to get your daughter in line. And he's like, no one can get my daughter in line. She is the worst. I mean, his actual line is, my daughter causes problems for everyone, Luthor.
Yep. In the best way possible, but not from their perspective, I imagine.
And it's funny though, because like what is Sam Lane going to do? Like it's the relationship with Lois is really just to make it like suck more for everyone involved, because like if it was any other newspaper or any other general, it would just be like, we're shutting you down because the president says so, because we got strong armed by like our defense contractor. All the same problems would occur, but the fact that the general in question happens to be the reporter who's writing all the shit's father is like such an interesting like knife twist.
Mm-hmm.
But we get introduced to John Corbin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a. we kind of skipped over it, but during Lois's introduction, she dumpsters a thing of flowers that turn out to have been from John, which is important in that intro thing. I think it's funny because when you read through it in that initial scene, it seems almost heartless on Lois's part that she would dumpster these flowers, and then you meet John and you're like, oh, I understand.
Yeah. Yeah, like, because at first he like seems kind of hurt, and then he like comes off as a dick. And I like how Superman like steps in as Clark to be like, "Oh, hi, sorry, we've got a lunch meeting actually going on."
Kermit the Frog, really?
And hi, I'm Clark Kent, and then they shake hands, and like he like has like super grip, and so like Corbin actually has to like pull away in pain, and that's like kind of a fun moment there. That's effective, clumsy Clark stuff.
Yes, I agree. It's a good way of using Clark Kent.
Yeah, because like while they're shaking hands, Corbin has like this straight, angry look on his face, and they pan to Clark, and the next panel, Clark has that goofy, like nonchalant look on his face.
Hi ho! I'll tell your father hello. Is such a biting line as he like walks away too. And then this is a bit that like kind of frustrates me, which is that Clark invites Lois to lunch. And then later he doesn't actually pay for it, even though he's the one who offered to like get her lunch. And I'm like, Clark, no. That is such a dick move.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like a Peter Parker thing to do, but I mean, like Parker would not be able to pay because he was broke, rather than whatever's going on here. But there's tension in Clark at this point between like trying to maintain his alternate identity and then also genuinely being interested in Lois and like, you know, wanting her to like him, but also like not wanting, like she's a naturally perceptive person. So it's like sort of in order to maintain his identity, he has to sort of do things that would push her away a little bit. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
it's kind of like a throwback to like the first book where Lana tells him that he has to get better at lying because he sucks ass at it.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I have this thing in my ear. Gotta go, bye. I was like, oh, wait. So he never practiced. Gotcha. He's got absolutely worse.
And like right before that, he like spills the milk to try to like prove that he's like such a dweeb.
Yeah.
And then immediately has to like come up with a new excuse. And it's just like this cascading of being like bad at lying in general. Meanwhile, Luthor is telling Sam Lane, like, hey, I've got a suit of armor that will be able to do some real damage because it's the stuff that like we created the waste that created the parasite with, which I like that as a detail, like that the parasite is like a Kryptonian byproduct.
Mm-hmm.
Like if early origin stuff should have like some Kryptonian ties just to like keep the world from being too big too fast. Like I
agree.
It should get bigger and get weirder and have like more out there kind of stuff. But at first, like having a few things that are like, you know, the Kryptonite villain of the week stuff from Smallville is okay. Like as long as you branch out eventually. And I like it here with Parasite. He's the first villain that Superman fights in this. Like it makes sense. And then Corbin's like jumps up as being like, I want to pilot this fucking thing, which doesn't quite make sense because it's not like he has an actual grudge with Superman yet, but it kind of reads that way.
Yeah. The only thing I can think is that, like, it's clear that Lois is spending a lot of time with Superman, and it's clear that Corbin is, like, deeply jealous of anything that is occupying Lois Lane's time that is not him.
Yeah, that's fair.
So maybe he just wants to kill him to eliminate what he sees as some kind of competition to himself in his sort of, like, narcissistic fashion. A diagnosis that is overused these days, but perhaps fits for Corbin in this case.
No, I think you have a good read there. So anyway, Superman gets lured into meeting with Sam Lane. They make a big deal about the alien thing here. And I can tell that this is what like Geoff Johns planned to like really hang the hat of his run on at this point. Like the human hostility to aliens, especially with like the Krypton stuff. Mm-hmm. Like you can tell that that's what he wants to build towards, because like that's like the big talking point with Sam right off the bat. But so Superman like agrees to go with Sam Lane, and like once it like starts to get kind of hostile, he's like, this feels like an interrogation. And it's like, that's exactly what this is. And so like I'm leaving. Like, if you go, you're an enemy of the United States. I'm nobody's enemy, General. And like storms off. And that's when they start shooting at him, and then like the robot armor of Metallo comes to attack him, which I will say I overall like that it does feel like a nod to the classic Lex Luthor armor.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the exact shape that I would make it, but like I'm here for it enough. It also does not stick around for very long because it blows up almost immediately.
It does. It does. Yeah, I mean, like all the xenophobia and like the comic being extremely down on the military, which is like, I mean, not to say that I'm like a military booster exactly, but like they're depicted in an almost villainous fashion throughout this comic that reminded me again, like, oh yeah, this was made in like 2009 or something like that. So it's like the war in Iraq is still very fresh. There's a lot of like feelings of xenophobia surrounding like, you know, people like immigrants and things like that. So he's clearly speaking to those anxieties of the time, I think, with this portion of the comic.
Yeah. I mean, like I can't fault the decisions made, like the impetus to like explore these issues with Superman, I think is a good one. Mm-hmm. It's just, it feels very heavy handed.
Yeah,
you're
it
like,
does.
We're definitely building towards a thing here. Okay, cool. The fight with the Corbin in Metallo armor is pretty quick.
Yeah.
I do like that when he starts getting exposed to Krypton, he's still invulnerable, or rather, bullets still bounce off him.
He just bleeds.
But he does bleed from them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, that's a cool detail. Touch.
Yeah, I like that too.
And I like that he gets shot in the forehead and that bullet ricochets and blows up the Kryptonian chunk. Like, that's gotta hurt.
Yeah. I do like a little bit later when the military guys are like pursuing him through the sewer, and it's like Superman as like horror movie villain or something, you know, for just a little bit. He's like suddenly like a slasher movie villain as they're like pursuing him through the sewers in the dark and whatever.
Yeah, I was wondering if he wasn't recovering faster because he was in the dark.
Oh, that's a good point. He does he know at this point that he gets his powers from the sun?
I don't know. And I was wondering if maybe he just doesn't know that, and that's why he seems to be like a little bit weaker until he gets out into the sunlight.
Yeah. They don't make a big deal of it, but that would be funny if he just didn't realize that.
Yeah. Huh.
I didn't think of that, but it's a good point.
Yeah. I enjoy Lex Luthor working on the exploded John Corbin, although I think the timeline's a little fucked here because the next issue like seems to pick up like immediately after, and Corbin has been converted into this like cyborg body really fast.
Yeah, well, he's just alive. He's just that good, I guess.
He was not in a cave with a box of scraps.
Yeah.
So Sam Lane shows up to shut down the planet, and they're like, hey, you know, the First Amendment is a thing. And it's like, no one gives a shit about the Daily Planet.
They're like, well, the Patriot Act was also a thing, so you're screwed.
Right. So news coverage is that Superman is fighting the army, which I'm like, when did they even like get that coverage? Like clearly propaganda, because they're being fed this line because like the fight actually hasn't occurred yet, at least not in like public sight. Superman like eventually does escape into like the sun and seems to start like turning around the whole thing. And like Sam Lane is like pretty much like, no, it's a done deal. Superman is dead. But like Superman's already on the run, and like their like weapon to hurt him has already been destroyed. So like,
yeah.
You have not gotten some very important updates on your plan, man.
Yeah, he's a little behind the moment, maybe.
Yeah, but I like that it's set up where it's just like, oh yeah, he's so confident, and then like the tank flies through the air, and it's just like, or maybe not.
Yeah, He's got some fight left in him, yes.
Yep. But then, yeah, the Metallo robot form shows up, or cyborg form shows up, demanding a rematch. And again, I'm like, how did you get this? Like, this is a complicated design. Like, this is not just like slapped together. And this is actually my big thing, which is that the armor doesn't look at all like the ultimate robot body. And like, if it looked closer, then I could believe that he was just integrated into the robot body. But instead, they're so different that it's just like, well, how did you have the time to make this thing? Like, this is really complicated.
He's really good at what he does, Case.
Yeah.
I thought he's Lex Luthor.
He has an M belt buckle.
He just had, the blueprints lying around and all the parts ready to go. He was just waiting for some schmuck to get messed up enough that he could go, I could, so he just had it all ready to go. That's as was stated, he's Lex Luthor. That's how.
Right.
We can hand wave it, I guess, but yeah, it is weird now that you point it out. I didn't think about it, but it is pretty fast.
Right. It's because it's like supposed to be like immediately after that's all. And like, again, you can hand wave it and it's fine. Like, he's got advanced tech tools. You could say it's like all nanobots or whatever. And it's like, okay, it's fine.
Nanomachine, son.
But anyway, Corbin is a douchebag to his other soldiers. Like, he like is dangerous to them even without them like disagreeing with him, when it's just like, are you sure you're okay, sir? Like, get the fuck back. And he like starts like smashing around shit. But it is nice that they honor the rules that talking is a free action when Lois runs out, and they just like, they're allowed to like chat for a minute.
Yeah.
The fight must stop for 30 seconds.
That's right.
Then we get the very like Frankenstein's monster looking Corbin when like Superman like punches him and like blows off his helmet. And that's like a fun moment right there. I like Superman jumping in the way of the kryptonite beam, assuming that it could actually hurt a person, which makes sense. Like, kryptonite is radioactive, even in its like weakest form, when it's just like inertly like radiating out. It's dangerous to people, just more dangerous to Superman. So like the concentrated beam should hurt her, but it's also not set up that it actually would.
Yeah, I mean, it's a concentrated beam of radiation, so I can only assume it would at least cause cancer.
Yeah. I like
for cancer.
I like his plan of taking the manhole cover and like melting that over the chamber. Like, that makes sense. Like, that's just a good plan. Like, I'm like, that's a good use of your powers, both super strength and heat vision. Tactical use right there. Cool. Flying him up into space to like keep him from breathing. Also cool. Although it is effectively a chokehold.
Yeah, you could just put him in a sleeper and kind of achieve the same thing, right? I always love it when they have Superman like use his powers in conjunction in very clever ways, because like there's nothing that puts me to sleep faster than a writer that just has Superman punch things all the time.
Yeah.
When he's got this gigantic array of amazing powers and it's like, Clark's not an idiot. He's totally capable of using all this stuff in conjunction in fun ways. And that is some of the best stuff in comics. Always use powers in unexpected ways. That is my motto.
For real.
So
Superman can't put people in chokeholds. He might break their neck.
That's a good point.
That is also true. So instead, fly them into the ionosphere.
Yeah, well, he operates on a different scale. What can we say?
Right. So he comes back and he confronts Sam Lane and is just like, back down. Like, and the soldiers are like, no, Corbin was a douchebag. And then like the citizens are like, Corbin was a douchebag. And like everyone's like, yeah, Corbin was a douchebag. And Sam's like, I guess he was being a douchebag, and like retreats. Man, the shot of Lois. Yeah. The shot of Lois. I'm gonna just show the panel. This bottom shot there. Man, she looks like Margot Kidder right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder why they keep trying to do these one-for-one shots of these characters for some reason.
These shots looking so much like the actors from the Superman 78.
Yeah. So weird.
They just want to drop us in the uncanny valley like once an issue at least.
Yeah.
That's all.
So then we get a classic Superman like approaches Lex and is like, I'll be watching you, Luthor.
Yeah. Very reminiscent of the beginning of Superman the Animated Series.
Yep, 100%. Mm-hmm. And it's a classic kind of scene, like
yeah, for sure.
So it works really well, and I like the idea that the planet is picking up
700%.
Yeah, something like that. And they like, I like Clark going to like flirt with Lois, but also setting himself up to like have Superman be like seen as a different person. Yeah. Like that's an effective misdirect right there, where it's just like, sorry, Clark, I have to ditch you, and then like run upstairs, and you know he just uses super speed to be up there. That's cool. I like their flirting being interrupted by Jimmy. That's always fun.
Yeah, a classic move. Good job, Jim.
And I like Superman restoring the Daily Planet to its rotating spin. Like that's a nice moment there. And the answer, like, this is the on the nose one where it's like, are you a man or an alien? I'm Superman. Like, it's a nice line, but it is very much like, man, Geoff really wants to talk about the alien experience here.
Yeah.
And then I enjoy the whole Luthor tribute thing that he does, like the bread and circus thing being like disrupted by Superman, like being so inspiring. And like, after no one shows up for Luthor's thing, we get like yet another Midwestern country bumpkin, like coming into town and like bumping into, like, I think it's supposed to be the same person, or at least it's archetypally the same person. But instead of being cussed out for like looking up into the sky, it's like we always are looking up into the sky because Superman might come around. And then we get a really good version of look up in the sky, like with like that one woman, and like it, like we see like the rush of people's hair like going, and just Superman flying, and like that's a really good uplifting.
It's a strong ending.
It's a very strong ending to this piece. Yeah,
I agree. And that is Secret Origin. I definitely vibe stronger with the back half than I do at the front. But
well, like the back half is one story versus the front is a bunch of like little snippets of like Clark's life.
Yeah, and kind of setting up the Legion stuff that would be done in a different volume later. But yeah, I mean, it has a lot of the beats that I really like in a Superman origin. I do think that some of Geoff Johns' dialogue is cornier than I remember it being. Like there are times where like characters will say something and I'm like, man, this feels so much like something that a character would say in like a wrestling bit, right? Like it feels like bad kayfabe almost. Like I can't think of a really great example. I think some of it comes from like the fighting banter with like Parasite. I'm pretty sure there's like one of those Parasite being like, oh man, you taste good. And he's like, oh yeah, well, why don't you eat my fist or something like that? And I'm like, okay, well,
right.
but overall, I like the ideas present in this story. And that's always the thing that, the reason I like Superman in general is because of considering some of the like ethical ramifications of this kind of thing, and this story plays with that in some interesting ways, I think.
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting companion piece to Superman Earth 1, which I think these two are the inspirational bits for Man of Steel in a lot of ways. Like, obviously Man of Steel and Earth 1 like kind of came about too much at the same time for it to really be a direct inspiration for it all. But like you could see how like there are bits of like, how do we modernize Superman while keeping true to like the weird shit of the past that's going on in there. And I think that I ultimately really like the stance of being like fairly classic, fairly earnest. Like Superman never feels like poorly written because he's always just so goddamn earnest, aside from his like one-liners not being great, but he's also supposedly bad at lying. So you assume he's also bad at one-liners. Like,
yeah, he's probably not nailing those zingers. Like
he's Spider-Man. Not. Yeah, exactly. He's not Spider-Man.
Yeah, I was going to say, bringing up Earth 1, it's like, I hated Earth 1. Like, I really did not like that take on it. So it's like, it's interesting you bring that up as the two elements that kind of combine to make the Man of Steel thing, because it's like, there are some little parts of Man of Steel that I do like, and I think a lot of those are ideas that are borrowed from Secret Origin.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then there's everything else.
Right.
So
I don't want to be like too negative about it, but like, but there's certainly some missteps going on there. So like I hadn't read this before. Jmike, had you read this before?
Nope. I'd heard about it, but I'd never read it before.
Yeah, like I ended up really enjoying it. Like I said, I think that this earnest Superman's like a good take. It's bringing the classic stuff back. Like I think that it came out at a time where people weren't quite clear, like, hey, are we rebooting stuff right now? Because this was right around like Infinite Crisis, where it sort of was a multiverse reboot story, but at the same time, it kind of ended with the status quo being the exact same. wasn't sure if this was necessary, but like in a perspective where you're trying to do a new Superman story, and like it's what every 10 years you do a big origin story. Yeah. So this is like right after, about 10 years after birth, right? So sure, okay, cool. We're doing an updated Superman story. Like I said, I ended up really liking it. I really like his relationship with Lois. I also really like his relationship with Lana, and like I think that Geoff Johns just actually did a really good job writing chemistry for Clark with these two women, which is not a thing I normally would like praise Geoff Johns for. Like, like it's just not a thing. Like, not a like. I'm not trying to insult him. I'm trying to say like, just not a thing I would normally think about. Like, oh yeah, like you can write some good relationship stuff. Like, it's just not a strength that I normally think of for him. But these both work really well. Like, they're both vivacious women that I was like, kind of like putting myself in Clark's shoes, being like, what are you, just idiot, just seal the deal with one of them, like just go.
And they do feel meaningfully like different characters, which obviously in a lot of earlier Superman stories is not necessarily the case.
Yes, very, very much so. That like I really like that they are distinct women.
Yeah. I
like the deal with Pete Ross potentially having an idea of Clark having his powers because he's like so like happy about it all and always like his booster. And it allows for the old scenario of Pete Ross knowing that Clark is Superboy to be a thing. And like I'm here for that. I think they do a good job there. I overall like the Legion stuff. I like the origin stuff. I really like the Kents. So in general, I'm pretty happy with this. I think that the artwork is you have to like just sort of brace yourself for it, and then once you're in it, it's fine. Yeah. But there are some moments where it's just like I'm really like, obviously he's an amazing artist, but I just can't help but think like, what would this have looked like if it was Tom Grummett as the artist?
Yeah, totally different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say that as the Geoff Johns Gary Frank run on Superman went on, he did chill out a lot with this stuff. Like even by the Legion volume, I feel like the trips to the Uncanny Valley are much fewer and far between, a thing I appreciate greatly.
Yes, there are just too many trips in this book.
Yes, this book is the height of it being like, oh man, I keep seeing artistic renditions of a guy who died and also was a famous actor, and also it's like there's just too much baggage attached to that for me to be like, this is Clark Kent in a Superman story.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Like Clark Kent doesn't quite look like any actor who's played Clark Kent.
No, and he should not.
They're just really good actors' choices to play Clark Kent. Likewise for Superman. And so that's just the thing. Like, I really like the Christopher Reeve Superman's movies, but like they are not the totality of what Superman is.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that's the one area where like I kind of am like, I don't know. But I think this is technically the current origin for the character because of the way that Rebirth went. Because New 52 happened, and then the post-crisis Superman was inserted into the New 52 timeline. And I think this is the last origin update he got before that whole before New 52.
If I remember correctly, like that New 52 Superman died or something, and then the post-crisis one was there the entire time.
Yes.
Hiding in the background doing stuff for people, and then he just kind of like took over. He like slipped in that Superman's place and took over. Right. They consolidated everything.
Yeah,
right?
and then the timeline's kind of like just there's like a big don't worry about it wave that like rushes over everything.
Yeah.
Well, thank God for that. We need that wave because that hurts my brain so much. Everything you just
worse is there's two Loises for a period of time, and like
no.
For a stretch, the New 52 Lois is Superwoman and is like annoyed that people are like, how does no one notice that's like a much older version of me that is now like inhabiting my life?
It's like that's when we get like the end of like the Super Sons run.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then like a whole bunch of other stuff happens. Yeah, it was a really weird time with the Rebirth thing because they were trying to like make it all make sense.
Yeah, and now they like literally don't talk about it.
It's so weird. It's so weird.
Oh dear. Yeah, that's complicated. Yeah, I kind of fell out of the reading comic books entirely, but certainly Superman like partway through New 52. So I didn't know any of that you just told me. So
New 52 was rough. Like even the good stuff that was going on, like the Morrison Superman stuff, like like New 52 as a general structure was rough.
Yeah. and even Morrison's take on that rebooted character, I was like, I see where you're going with this, and I like it, but it needs tweaking. This is not quite right still.
Yeah.
I think that's like the tagline for the entire New 52 series.
Yeah.
New 52, it's not quite right.
Needs tweaking.
It needs tweaking, not quite right.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I don't want to go too far down that particular tangent.
Yeah.
So, Alex, thank you for bringing this book. This was a great read. I'm so happy to have now incorporated this into my knowledge of the Man of Steel. So,
yeah, you're most welcome.
It's a fun read. I would definitely recommend it. Where can people find you, follow you? What have you got going on that people should check out?
Yeah, so right now, I think the primary place that you can find me is I have a website, which is www.admcconnell.com, where my blog/newsletter can be found, where I expound about comics and tabletop role-playing and various novel projects that I'm working on. I'm a writer as well as a culture commentator. So yeah, that's where you can find all my stuff. That would be ADMCCONNELL. Every second letter is doubled.
That's a good way of trying to deal with the spelling issue that I'm sure pop up.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, no, everyone should be checking out your website.
Thank you.
Do you have any socials that you want to throw out there?
Not currently, no. I bailed off of Twitter a while, even Elon Musk takeover, but definitely afterwards I was like, man, good call.
Yeah, for real.
But yeah, just find me at the website. I'll be happy to talk to people on there.
Sure. And Jmike, where can people find you and follow you?
Oh, man, on the Dumpster Fire site known as Twitter, at Jmike101. I'm there. I'm lurking in the shadows, watching everything burn down very, very slowly. But if you tag me in something, send me a message, I will gladly respond and crack a couple of jokes with you.
Yeah, you're always a great inclusion in any conversation online.
I try.
It's because you're such a lurker, and then you emerge with a wonderful jab. As for me, you can find me on all those platforms at Case Aiken, except for Instagram, where I'm holding on to my AIM screen name for dear life, where you can find me at Quetzalcoatl5, because I was a pretentious mythology nerd and a Legion of Superheroes nerd in high school. There you go. That's why. Also, you should check out certainpov.com, where you can find more episodes of this show as well as tons of great other shows. You can also find a link to our Discord server where you can come interact with us directly. And then you can talk to people from other cool shows. I'm going to just drop out Fun and Games with Matt and Geoff. Matt, our former editor, and Geoff, our current editor, host a wonderful discussion about video game just in general, video game journalism, video game as an industry, and then video game nostalgia. So check that all out and then circle back for more episodes of this show. But until then, stay super, man.
Men of Steel is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Jmike Folson and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Sophia Ricciardi. Our logo is by Chris Batista, and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our theme is by Jeff Moonen.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone.
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back?
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Pass, we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.